The projector hummed behind Dominic Hargrove like a death march, and I watched my own face appear on the screen next to a red X. Just like that. 7 years erased with a single PowerPoint slide. This breach, he said, his voice steady and certain, the kind of certain that comes from practicing lies in the mirror, could have been prevented if our head of cybersecurity had done her job. 20 executives stared at their notepads. Not a single person looked at me. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, mixing with the hum of the projector, and I thought about something stupid and random, how my dad used to say you can tell a lot about a person by whether they look you in the eye when they're lying. Dominic wasn't even trying. He knew he'd already won. I felt my fingernails digging into my palms under the conference table, leaving little half-moon marks in my skin that would still be there 3 hours later when I'd finally look at my hands and wonder why they hurt. Before I continue my story, please support this channel by smashing the subscribe button and let me know your local time down in the comments. My name is Cassandra Vale, cast to people who actually knew me, and until that moment I was the director of cybersecurity at Pemberton Digital Solutions in Chicago. 6 years of building their security infrastructure from nothing. 17 attempted breaches stopped. Millions in potential losses prevented. And now Dominic was standing in front of the board with his perfect suit and his perfect lies, telling them I was the reason 847,000 customer records had been stolen last Tuesday at 3:47 in the morning. The same vulnerabilities I documented in a 47-page report 3 months ago. The same risks I'd begged him to let me fix. The same warnings he'd called catastrophizing and fear-mongering and not aligned with our growth objectives. But none of that mattered now, because Dominic needed someone to blame, and I was perfect. A woman in a technical role who'd pushed back one too many times. Someone expendable. The breach had happened on a Tuesday morning at 3:47 a.m. I know because that's when my phone started screaming with alerts. By the time I got to the office at 4:30, still in sweatpants and my brother's old Northwestern hoodie, the damage was already catastrophic. Hackers had accessed our client database through the exact vulnerability I'd flagged in February. The one Dominic had refused to fund repairs for because Q1 numbers needed to look strong for investors. I'd spent 19 straight hours that day containing the breach, coordinating with the FBI, notifying affected clients, and documenting every step for the inevitable investigation. I hadn't slept. I'd barely eaten. I'd called my mom at midnight just to hear her voice because I was so exhausted I couldn't think straight anymore. And through it all, I genuinely believed we were in this together. That Dominic understood I'd done everything possible to prevent this. I was so incredibly wrong. The emergency board meeting happened Friday afternoon. No warning, no preparation time, just a calendar invite at 2 p.m. for a 3 p.m. meeting titled Security Incident Review. I should have known then. Should have felt it coming. But I walked into that room actually believing I was there to explain what had happened and outline our recovery plan. Instead, Dominic had prepared a presentation that painted me as incompetent, negligent, and possibly complicit. He showed emails I'd sent about other minor issues, framed to look like I was constantly crying wolf. He mentioned a training session I'd missed in March, neglecting to mention I'd been in the hospital with my dad after his stroke. He even implied that my close relationship with a vendor might have created a conflict of interest. That vendor was a woman I'd gone to college with who'd helped us negotiate better rates on security software. The insinuation was disgusting. Cassandra, do you have anything to say in your defense? The board chair, Vivian Strout, finally looked at me directly, and I saw something flicker across her face. Discomfort, maybe, or recognition that this was wrong, but not enough to stop it. I opened my mouth to speak, to defend myself, to explain about the warnings I'd sent, the budget requests I'd made, the protocols Dominic had personally overridden. Then I looked at Dominic's face. He was so certain of himself, so smug. He'd orchestrated this entire performance, and he'd already won. Anything I said now would sound like excuses, like desperation. So instead, I did something that clearly surprised him. I smiled. Not a big smile, just a small, knowing one. "I think the documentation will speak for itself," I said quietly. "I've kept very thorough records." Something shifted in Dominic's expression. Just for a second, I saw uncertainty crack through that polished confidence. But it wasn't enough to save me. 20 minutes later, I was being escorted out by Leonard from security, a kind man in his 60s who'd always asked about my dad's recovery and who now couldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Cass," he whispered as we walked past my office. "They wouldn't even let me pack my own things. Said they'd mail me my personal items after reviewing everything for security purposes." The irony wasn't lost on me. I handed over my badge, my laptop, my access cards. 7 years of my professional life reduced to a cardboard box that would arrive at my apartment 3 weeks later with half my stuff missing. I walked out of the Pemberton building into a cold October afternoon, the wind coming off Lake Michigan cutting through my blazer, and I genuinely didn't know what to do next. For the first time since college, I had nowhere to be, no crisis to manage, no team depending on me. I sat in my car in the parking garage for almost an hour, not crying exactly, just breathing, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so completely. The news broke that evening. Major data breach at Pemberton Digital, thousands of customers affected. By Saturday morning, it was national news. By Monday, there were calls for congressional hearings. And through all of it, Dominic's carefully constructed narrative held, this was the fault of inadequate security leadership. They never mentioned my name publicly, but everyone in the industry knew. LinkedIn messages started coming in. Some supportive, many just curious, a few openly gleeful that I'd failed. I stopped checking after the first day. My dad called from his rehab facility, worried he'd seen something on the news. "I'm fine, Pop," I lied. "It's all going to be fine." My best friend Raina came over with Thai food and wine and sat with me while I finally broke down and cried. The ugly kind of crying, where you can't catch your breath and your face gets blotchy and you say things that don't make sense. I told them, I kept saying, I told them this would happen. "I know you did," Raina said, holding my hand. "Everyone who matters will know you did." But that was the thing. I wasn't sure anyone who mattered would ever know. Dominic controlled the narrative. He had the board's support. He had the company's legal team crafting statements that protected him while implicitly blaming me. What did I have? Emails that were now locked in a company server I couldn't access. Documents on a laptop that was probably being wiped as we spoke. Memories of conversations that I couldn't prove. For 3 days, I barely left my apartment. I ordered groceries online, ignored my phone, and tried to figure out what my life looked like now. I'd spent my entire adult career building expertise in cybersecurity. I had a master's degree from Carnegie Mellon, certifications most people couldn't pronounce, and a track record of actual success protecting actual companies from actual threats. But none of that mattered if everyone believed I was the person who'd let Pemberton get breached. On Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after the breach, my doorbell rang. I almost didn't answer it. I was in pajamas at 10 a.m., my hair hadn't been washed in 3 days, and I was pretty sure it was just another delivery I hadn't ordered. But something made me check the peephole, and there stood a woman in a dark suit with a federal badge held up to the camera. Agent Octavia Raines from the FBI's Cybercrime Division. My heart started pounding as I opened the door. "Ms. Vale," she said, her voice professional but not unkind. "I need to ask you some questions about the Pemberton breach. May I come in?" I let her in, apologizing for the mess, the apartment, my appearance, everything. She waved it off and sat on my couch with a tablet and a recording device. "This is a voluntary interview," she explained. "You're not under investigation, but we need to understand the timeline of events leading to the breach." For the next 4 hours, I told her everything. And I mean everything. The vulnerabilities I'd identified, the budget requests that were denied, the emails I'd sent to Dominic and the executive team warning them about specific risks. Agent Rains listened without interrupting, taking notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When I mentioned my documentation, her eyes sharpened. "Do you have copies of these emails and reports?" she asked. "Not anymore," I admitted. "They took my laptop when they fired me, and I can't access the company server." She nodded slowly. "What about personal backups? Cloud storage? Anything you might have saved outside the company system?" And that's when I remembered. 3 months earlier, after Dominic had dismissed my security audit so completely, I'd been frustrated enough to email the whole report to my personal account. Not to leak it, not to use it against the company, but because I'd spent weeks on that document and I wanted to have a copy of my work. Just in case. "I might have something," I said carefully, pulling up my personal email on my phone. There it was. The full security audit, sent to myself on February 14th at 11:47 p.m. with the subject line, Backup, Security Assessment 2024. I handed my phone to Agent Rains and watched her scroll through the 47-page document. Her expression remained neutral, but I could see her jaw tighten as she read. "Ms. Vale," she said finally, "I'm going to need you to forward this to me officially, along with any other documentation you have of warnings you issued to leadership." Over the next week, I worked with Agent Rains and her team, providing everything I had. Emails where I'd begged Dominic to approve a $180,000 security upgrade that would have prevented the exact type of attack that occurred. Meeting minutes where I'd outlined specific vulnerabilities. Quarterly reports where I'd rated our security posture as critically insufficient. Budget proposals that had been rejected or reduced to useless amounts. And most damning of all, an email exchange from March where Dominic had explicitly told me to stop fear-mongering to the board about hypothetical scenarios that were statistically unlikely to occur. The investigators were thorough. They interviewed my former team members, several of whom confirmed everything I'd said and added details I hadn't even known about. Apparently, Dominic had told the IT director to ignore my security recommendations because Cassandra is too risk-averse for a growth-stage company. They pulled server logs showing that the vulnerability I'd flagged had been exploited exactly as I'd predicted. They documented every single time I'd tried to do my job correctly and been prevented from doing it. Agent Rains called me 3 weeks after our first meeting. "Ms. Vale, I want you to know that your documentation has been extremely valuable to this investigation. The picture that's emerging is very different from the public narrative." I felt something loosen in my chest. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "we continue our investigation. And I'd recommend you speak with an employment attorney. You may have legal options here." I hired Felipa Ortega, a lawyer who specialized in wrongful termination cases in the tech industry. She was expensive, blunt, and exactly what I needed. "They're going to try to settle this quietly," she told me in our first meeting. "Especially once the federal investigation findings go public. The question is whether you want money or vindication." I thought about that for a long time. Money would be nice. I was living on savings and my unemployment barely covered my rent. But money wasn't what kept me up at night, replaying that board meeting in my head. "Vindication," I said. "I want everyone to know what actually happened." Felipa smiled. "Good. That's going to be more painful for them than any settlement check." Meanwhile, my professional life was in limbo. I'd applied to a few positions, but nothing felt right. The Pemberton disaster hung over everything, unresolved and ugly. I spent my days helping my dad with his physical therapy appointments, cleaning out my late grandmother's house with my mom, and trying to figure out who I was without my career defining me. Then in early December, I got a LinkedIn message from someone named Theron Castellane, the Chief Information Security Officer at Sentinel Fortress Technologies, one of the top cybersecurity firms in the country. "Ms. Vale," his message read, "I've been following the Pemberton situation with interest. I've also reviewed your professional history and spoken with several mutual connections. I wonder if you'd be open to a conversation about opportunities at Sentinel Fortress. We're building a new division focused on security auditing and vulnerability assessment, and we need someone with your specific experience and integrity. I read that message 5 times. Sentinel Fortress was exactly the kind of company I dreamed of working for when I was getting my master's degree. They did cutting-edge security work for major corporations, government agencies, and financial institutions. Their reputation was impeccable. And they wanted to talk to me? In the middle of the biggest professional disaster of my life? I wrote back immediately. The interview process was intense. 3 rounds of technical assessments, presentations to their executive team, and conversations with people who asked hard questions about Pemberton. I didn't hide anything. I told them exactly what had happened, showed them my documentation, explained how I'd tried to prevent the breach and been overruled. "Why didn't you quit when they wouldn't listen to you?" one interviewer asked. It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself 100 times. "Because I believed I could still protect their clients even with limited resources," I said. "And because walking away would have left their systems completely undefended. I couldn't do that to the 600 employees and thousands of customers who were depending on security they didn't even know was inadequate." Theron called me personally with the offer. Director of Security Auditing at $285,000 annually plus equity and performance bonuses. Nearly triple my Pemberton salary. "We don't just want your technical skills, Cassandra," he said. "We want your judgment and your integrity. Those can't be taught." I accepted on the spot. That same week, the federal investigation results were released. The report was devastating for Pemberton. It detailed every warning I'd issued, every budget request denied, every security protocol that Dominic had overridden to save money or avoid inconveniencing users. It documented how the breach could have been prevented with the $180,000 upgrade I'd requested 8 months earlier. It showed that Dominic had knowingly accepted security risks to improve quarterly numbers before a planned acquisition deal. The regulatory fines were announced 2 days later. $23 million from the FTC for inadequate data protection. $17 million from the SEC for misleading investors about their security posture. Individual lawsuits from affected customers would likely cost them tens of millions more. And the acquisition deal they'd been working toward collapsed completely. No company wanted to touch Pemberton after the investigation revealed how deeply the security failures went. Dominic Hargrove resigned the same day the federal report was released. The board accepted it immediately and issued a statement about their commitment to rebuilding trust and implementing proper security measures. Vivian Strout, the board chair who'd sat silently while Dominic blamed me, resigned a week later under pressure from shareholders. The story became a case study in corporate negligence. Business schools started using it in ethics classes. Cybersecurity conferences referenced it as an example of what happens when leadership ignores technical expertise. And through all of it, my name was finally cleared. Publicly, completely, undeniably cleared. The news articles that had vaguely referenced security leadership failures now specifically mentioned that I had repeatedly warned management and been ignored. Industry publications interviewed me about the importance of listening to security professionals. LinkedIn was suddenly full of messages from recruiters, former colleagues, and people I'd never met saying they'd always known I wasn't at fault. It should have felt better than it did. Don't get me wrong, the vindication was real and important. But what I kept thinking about was how close I'd come to having none of this. If I hadn't sent myself that backup email on a frustrated February night, if Agent Rains hadn't asked about personal documentation, if I hadn't kept such meticulous records because that's just how my brain works, Dominic's lie might have stood forever. I would have been the scapegoat, the cautionary tale, the security director who failed. My career would have been over. And he would have walked away clean, probably landing at another company where he'd make the same choices and ruin someone else's life. The fragility of justice terrified me. How many people had been in my exact situation but without the documentation to prove their innocence? How many careers had been destroyed by powerful people's lies? I started my job at Sentinel Fortress in January, and it was everything I'd hoped it would be. Challenging work, supportive leadership, resources to actually do the job right. But I also started something else. I created a workshop for technical professionals, especially women and people from underrepresented backgrounds, about documentation, professional self-protection, and recognizing toxic management patterns before they destroy your career. I called it Covering Your Assets, which made my mom laugh and my more serious colleagues cringe, but it worked. The first session had 12 people. Within 6 months, I was teaching it quarterly to rooms of over 100. I taught people how to document warnings professionally, how to create paper trails without being insubordinate, how to recognize when a workplace situation was becoming dangerous to their reputation. I shared my Pemberton emails as examples of how to raise concerns in writing while maintaining professionalism. I explained the difference between being a team player and being a scapegoat. And I watched people have the same realization I'd had, that protecting yourself isn't paranoia, it's professional survival. One woman came up to me after a session in March, almost in tears. "I've been telling my boss for months that our database security is inadequate," she said. "He keeps saying I'm being dramatic. After hearing your story, I sent him a detailed email today summarizing my concerns and keeping a copy for myself." I hugged her. "That might save your career someday," I told her. "Or it might save your company. Either way, you've done the right thing." Looking back now, 18 months after that awful board meeting, I understand something I couldn't see then. Dominic didn't destroy me by firing me. He actually freed me to build something better. Pemberton was never going to value what I brought to the table. I was always going to be fighting for resources, justifying my existence, begging leadership to take security seriously. At Sentinel Fortress, I'm surrounded by people who understand that security isn't a cost center, it's a foundation. My team has grown to 14 people. We've helped dozens of companies identify and fix vulnerabilities before they become disasters. We've probably prevented breaches that would have ruined lives and destroyed businesses. And every single time we complete an audit and a client actually listens to our recommendations, I think about that February security report that Dominic called catastrophizing. The last time I saw Dominic Hargrove was at an industry conference last fall. He was there with some startup, clearly trying to rebuild his reputation. We ended up in the same session about regulatory compliance, and I watched him notice me, recognize me, and visibly pale. When the session ended, I walked right past him without a word. I didn't need to say anything. The truth had already spoken louder than I ever could. Sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes it requires documentation, patience, and the willingness to trust that reality will eventually catch up with lies. Sometimes karma doesn't arrive as dramatic revenge, it arrives as quiet vindication and the knowledge that you did everything right, even when powerful people insisted you were wrong. I still have that backup email saved. Still have every document from the investigation. Not because I need them anymore, but because they remind me that integrity isn't just about doing the right thing, it's about proving you did the right thing when someone tries to claim otherwise. That's the lesson I carry with me. That's what I teach. And that's how I sleep at night, knowing I survived something designed to destroy me. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share. Hit that notification button to listen to our next story.